right, so we've learned a little bit about the Media or Import tab. Now, we're going to learn about tab navigation. At any time, while you're working on your project, you can navigate to any of these tabs and it won't affect the integrity of your project, or you won't lose progress. And that's really beneficial, and it's really well organized, especially for if you only have one monitor or if you have a smaller monitor. This is very space conserving. It's really nice to have. So at any time, I'm done with my media import tab, so I can move over to my cut tab. We're not going to go over cut tab because this doesn't necessarily apply to the workflow that I'm going to be teaching. But you're more than welcome to tinker around in here and use this if you like. Basically, the gist of it is that you can create, you can trim up and cut up your footage before you actually bring it onto your timeline when you edit. But I don't personally use it very much, and so it does have some pretty cool features. So one of those features being a more advanced feature, but nice to know that it's there, that you can use it, is if you have a multicam setup. So let's say you have 3 or 4 cameras that are filming the same thing at different angles. You can actually put those into a folder in DaVinci Resolve and tell it to synchronize those based on the visual aspects of the clip, and it uses a neural network to detect all of that, synchronizes them without you having to do it manually. So this tab does have its advantages, and it is really good. However, for our purposes, we're not going to be dealing with it very much. So I would encourage you to just get some dummy footage and bring it in and just create a test project and just mess around in any of the tabs that we don't cover in this course. But for the purpose of this course, we are going to be going over mostly just media, edit, color, not a lot of Fairlight, maybe a little bit of Fairlight, and deliver over down here at the bottom. You can see these different tabs. So we're actually going to skip over cut and go straight to edit. Okay, so what we're seeing here is we are seeing the timeline. DaVinci Resolve is what's called a non-linear video editor. Back in the day, I don't know if you ever used something like Windows Movie Maker or some of those older, really simplified video editing programs, and some of them still exist today, for phones and lower powered computers. They have these apps that are developed for this purpose. Basically, you had these little spaces that you could fill with a video clip, and then you could choose to cut some off of the ends of the video clip or trim the clip within that space, but you were confined to putting a clip per space, and it was very linear. You could just do one video after another. You couldn't really stack videos. There's not a lot you could do. DaVinci Resolve, among others, HitFilm Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro, and some other video editing software, they're designed to be non-linear, meaning that you have a timeline. Envision it like a desk. Back in the day when they used to cut film together, some filmmakers still refuse to go digital. They actually still do film. What they do is they would bring the clips from the film and they would lay it out, and they would actually physically cut them with blades or scissors or whatever, and they would arrange them the way that they want them and then splice them back together. And that's how they would build it. And this is actually quite similar to that. So I'm just going to show you around a little bit. If anything's ever missing, or if there's something where you're like, oh, how come that's not there like I need it to be, you can just click on these icons and it'll bring it up. So for example, right here, I can click on my media pool. Look at that. My media pool has the clips and music that I brought in from my media tab. So you can see this right here, this media pool corresponds with the media pool inside of the edit tab. Very convenient. So we can jump back and forth if we need to bring in more media, or if we're like, oh, I need a screenshot or a picture or something. You can bring it in, go back to your media tab, bring it in, and then go back to your edit tab, and you don't lose integrity of the project. By the way, I recommend Control S, saving your project often. DaVinci Resolve is still in beta, so I've experienced some crashes, and with that being said, it's just best practice to save often. I'm talking literally, like, I will save my project after every major edit that I've done to it. So every, I don't know, 5 minutes probably. Any amount of work that I would definitely not want to lose, I save. Okay. So, this is our timeline. Now, timelines, you can have multiple timelines or workspaces. For example, I'm going to bring in a clip onto the timeline. By the way, I'm just clicking and dragging, and look what happens. If I bring it in my media pool right here, right over here, you'll see it. It pops onto the screen, timeline 1. So DaVinci Resolve is creating a timeline for this, or a workspace for this clip, right? And I can look at this clip, and let's say I'm like, you know what? So let's say I wanted to rename this timeline. And by the way, all I've done here is I've clicked on this icon right here to get rid of my master bins, and just minimized them up into here. And I'm also going to click on this icon right here, which is basically just fills the screen vertically with whatever window you have. And I'm going to click on that because we don't have very many clips, so I want to maximize the space that I have for my timeline. So to rename the timeline, you just click and then click again on that. And we can put this to be, let's just say test edit, and then hit enter. So you just click, kind of a slow double click, right? 1, 2, just like that. Okay, so now that we're in the timeline, there's some things to be aware of when you're editing. First of all, I'm actually going to remove this, and I'll show you how to do that later. First of all, if I want to bring a clip into my timeline, but before I drop it on my timeline, I want to make sure that it's, oh, I don't know, let's say in focus, or make sure it's the clip that I want. If I did multiple takes, I want to make sure that it's the clip that I'm looking for. So what you do is you double click on one. And what that brings up is that brings up a source monitor, or in other words, a screen that's displaying a source right here. So this clip here, I can see that let's say I really like this portion of the clip, but not the whole clip. What I can do is I can set what are called in and out points. So how you do that is you drag this little playhead to the point of this clip, to the point that you want the clip to start at once it's put into the timeline. And on your keyboard you hit I, and that just stands for in point, the in point when it starts. Okay? And then you can drag it over like this, and let's say I want that to be my out point. Then I hit O on the keyboard. Pretty straightforward. In is for when the clip starts, so it's your in point when you enter the clip, in point. And then you have your out point, which is when the clip ends. Now, you're not destroying the clip, you're not deleting everything outside the in and out points. You are just creating an in and out so that you can drop it onto the timeline without having to drop it into the timeline and trim it up, which we'll go over, and you probably will still need to trim it a little bit, but it's a time-saving measure to be able to go through, because like, for example, this clip right here, if I were to play this clip through, you can see that the beginning of the clip, I'm starting out, I'm trying to, I'm working with the stabilizer, so I'm trying to get a smooth motion peeking around this gate. And then the camera comes into focus. So this clip here, I probably only want to use this right here, right? Because you're peeking around and then boom. That shot by itself is probably all I want to use. So I would put the in point right here and the out point right there, and then drop it onto my timeline. And it remembers. So if you look at my media pool over here, you can see it has these little lines on the clips. And you can see that it remembers my in and out points. So I can look at a glance and see, oh, I've created in and out points for these two clips because they have these lines showing me what portion I've created those in and out clips for. It's really handy. And it saves you a lot of time. So for my workflow, for example, I'll be like, oh, I need this clip and this clip and this clip. So I'll go through and let's say double click on this one here. And I will say, oh, I like this right here. So I'm going to go in and out. Okay, that's been selected. And let's say I want to use this clip. And okay, right there. So I would create an in and an out point right there. And this clip, I can just scroll through it really quickly. And I don't know if well, I'll just use it just for the sake of using it. So I'll go in and out on there, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we've created some in and out points. Now let's learn about putting it onto the timeline, because there are multiple ways that you can do it. So if I click, let's start with this clip right here. Well, you know what? Actually, I want to start with this clip because let's do an establishing shot. So we want to establish right here. Okay, so I have this. So now, if I hover over the video, I get a few options. I get video and audio, and then the video itself would be considered both. So let's say I just want video. I click on the video and drag the video icon down here. And what happens is I just drag the video portion of that clip onto the timeline. Just like that. If I click on the audio, the waveform icon, click and drag, then it's just bringing the audio onto them. And you can see I brought them onto the timeline as separate clips. But let's say I want to bring both the video and the audio. I just click anywhere in the video and bring it down. And it just brings in the in and out points that I've already created. And it's super handy. It's a really quick way to go through all your footage, figure out what you want, and then bring it onto your timeline, trim off, you trim the fat, and you bring in just what you want right out of the gate. And then you can fine tune it within the timeline, which we'll go over. So I'm going to do that. So I'm actually going to get rid of that. I'm going to bring it in with just the video. And I'm going to bring this clip in with just the video. Let's do some of this one right here. Bring it down. And I actually really like this one here. And I'll bring it in as well. By the way, I chose these clips intentionally because it's a video that I made that I filmed in a log profile. In other words, the camera was really flat. That way I can show you in depth. We'll probably spend the most time here in the edit tab and in the color tab. Those are going to be our main focuses on this, throughout this course, is the edit and the color, because that's where a lot of the most important things happen. Okay, so I've got those brought in, and those clips look pretty good. There's a lot that we can do here. So basic navigation within the timeline. Now that we know how to get footage into our timeline, now we need to look at how we navigate in the timeline. So obviously I recommend a mouse and keyboard. If you're on a laptop, get a dedicated mouse and then just use the keyboard on your laptop. So with video editing software, I highly recommend learning the hotkeys. The hotkeys are very crucial. Control S, by the way, hotkey there. Hotkeys are very crucial in very fast and effective workflow. A fast and effective workflow relies on hotkeys, in other words. So you can see here that if I go to keyboard customization, you can see that when I click on a hotkey, it shows me what that hotkey does. And anything that's blank is something that's either in tangent to another one. So you can see if I click on control or return, it shows me what that does if I do control plus X or control plus this. So I'll deselect that. And this is really important to know, because if you ever want to know how to do something, you can just come through here. Oh, let's see, Q. Oh, source timeline viewer. So that'll show me the source / timeline viewer. If A is normal edit mode, or in other words, like the mouse mode. Okay, for today's video purposes, we're just going to leave it on the standard DaVinci Resolve customization with the minor tweak that I made of making it so C doesn't auto color the clip, because that's just a minor annoyance of mine that I don't like. Other than that, I actually don't mind the hotkeys. They make sense to me. So let's take a look at navigating the timeline. So you have this red dot with a line. This is what's called your playhead. The playhead is important for a few reasons. This frame by frame is going to display up here in this window what you're looking at. So whatever you're editing or where you're going to cut or whatever you're doing, your playhead is showing you exactly on the frame that you're working on within the videos. Okay? And so if you move the playhead forward or backward on the timeline, it's what's called scrubbing. You're scrubbing through your timeline. And you can see here that it's displaying each of the frames as quickly as I move the timeline. Okay? When you want to play back the clips the way that they are on the timeline, you would either drag the playhead on here, which is just from start to finish of the clips you have on the timeline back to the beginning, like that, or you would click and drag the playhead back to the beginning. And you can always move this around and do whatever you want with it. But it's just going to display different things on your screen depending on where it's at. And so it's going to give you a preview of what it looks like. Okay, so that's one of the first basic functions of navigating on your timeline, is adjusting the playhead so that you know where you're working from. In conjunction with the playhead is zooming or scaling the timeline. Now, scaling or zooming on the timeline does not have any effect on the length of your clips, even though it appears to make them longer. All it's doing is magnifying them. It's as if you're looking at them through a magnifying glass when you zoom in, or from a bird's eye view when you zoom out. That's important because you can zoom in and out for ease of your workflow, but it's not going to change the length of your clips. So the easiest way to do that, one way to do it is if you come over here, there's a slider, and you can slide in and out to zoom in and out on the clips. I don't love doing it that way just because it's inconvenient. I hold Alt on my keyboard and zoom in and out with my scroll wheel on my mouse. Now, this is important because the reason why I say it works in tandem with the playhead is because wherever your playhead is where it's going to zoom in and out from, not from where your mouse is. For example, if I move my playhead to the beginning or to the end of this clip, if I hold Alt and zoom in, it's zooming in as if the playhead is the center of my bird's eye view, or in this case, my magnifying glass, right? If I hold Alt and zoom out, it's going to zoom out, keeping it as center as it can, or on the screen if it can, while also displaying other information that I want to get. So I zoomed all the way out here on my timeline. You can see that, like, have you ever used Microsoft Excel or like Google Sheets or something where you can actually create cells into infinity, right? I remember I always used to do that. In Excel, I would click and drag, and I would just drag all the way down, and what it would do is it would create into infinity. It would create additional cells, down into the quadruple A's or AAAC or into the 100,000s, whatever, right? So that nonlinear video editors are the same way. If you look here, I have a ruler with timestamps on it. And this is showing me, in proportion to how long my clips are, this is showing me how much time I'm viewing inside my editor. So in other words, it's basically expanding my desk, to push that film analogy, right? It's expanding my desk and giving me a greater capability to work on more clips at once. This is showing me a long time. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, so right now, 3, 4, okay, so this is about 4 seconds. So if I zoom all the way out, this is showing me 13 hours and 32, and it stops there, but you could, in theory, go farther than that, but we're not too worried about that. So hold Alt and zoom with your scroll wheel. Super nice to have, and just wherever your playhead is where your bird's eye view, magnifying glass, however you want to visualize it, is going to anchor from the playhead and zoom in and out as if it were the center. Okay, so there's some basic navigation. You can also resize any of this if you need to at any time. So most of this, if I click here, look, I can resize those windows. I can resize this right here to make those bigger or smaller. I can resize my timeline to make it bigger or smaller. I can resize my audio and video tracks to make my video bigger and my audio smaller, or vice versa. I'll just keep it in the center for now. And I can also change the size in which the clips appear on the timeline, or the way they appear. So depending on the caliber of computer that you're working on, it takes quite a few resources for it to generate these live thumbnails. You can see how on the clip it's showing me what the video kind of looks like throughout the thumbnail. And it actually takes quite a bit of compute power to do that. So I can just turn that off if it's running a little slow. So I come into Timeline View Options, click on that, and I can turn any of those things off. So I can turn it to film. So film tries to show me a snippet of each frame as I look at the clip. Thumb just shows me a thumbnail of the start to finish. And then plain just shows it as if it were a small strip, but it doesn't show me anything. So if I click on that, my video clips have now just become little bars. Or if I click, then it's going to generate a beginning and end thumbnail for each clip. Or if I click back on this, it's going to generate thumbnails for all of them. For today's intent and purpose, we're going to just click on this, just to keep it simple. And because I'm recording this in real time, so, I don't need to waste resources on that. Okay, so let's start editing. So once we have the clips on the timeline, now we can start trimming the clips and getting them how we want them to look. And by the way, if these look a little too small for you, you can actually keep the previews off. You can make them plain clips, but you can actually scale them up a little if you want to. And I'll show you why that's important and why you might want to do that. You can do that with the audio as well. So I'm going to go ahead and increase those sizes and enable audio waveforms. And I'll show you why I did that in a minute. But now, so most anything on the timeline you can click and drag to move. It's pretty basic. And that is your selection mode, or in other words, A. A is the hotkey that's automatically set. So if you click A on your keyboard, that allows you to either click and drag anywhere in the timeline not on a clip, click and drag like this to select multiple clips at once, as if you're in your file browser on your computer or something. You're selecting multiple at once. Just create this kind of selection window. You can select multiple at once. Or I can click and drag a clip and I can move it around on the timeline. So, but I don't really want to do that right now. Another great thing about the navigation is once your timeline starts to get really long, so let's move these over, and you're moving over here, you can use, down here, you can click and drag this little bar to move around on the timeline. That's one way to go about it. Or you can actually click and hold the middle mouse button. So your scroll wheel is typically also has a button. So you can click and hold that button, and you'll actually click and drag with the mouse as if it were like a touch screen, right? On a touch screen, when you click and drag it, it's like you're moving it around with your finger. It's the same idea with this. You can click and drag with the middle mouse wheel and it'll move it around. And it's not just two-dimensional, or excuse me, it's not just one-dimensional. It's not just from left to right. It actually does it if you have multiple clips stacked on top of each other. So if I do this and I click and drag, you can see that moving my mouse up and down actually can show me multiple layers of these clips. We'll go into layers here in a minute, but that is kind of the basis of navigation. You can click and drag, you can click and move your mouse with your middle mouse button, you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, or you can use this little bar at the bottom to go from side to side on your timeline. Okay, so let's get into the fun part. Clipping, or trimming and moving. So, obviously, any empty space on a timeline is translated into black video. So if you're exporting something, so for example, if I were to export these clips like this space right here would be translated as black footage on my video. It would remain this about 2 seconds would remain black in the video. So we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn about trimming and editing and snapping and moving. So there's a couple ways to go about filling this gap, and you just saw what I kind of did there really quickly. Method number 1 is using the backspace key to delete negative space. Negative space in DaVinci Resolve is selectable. So if I move my mouse over it and left click, you can actually select that negative space and get rid of it. Now, you can either push delete or backspace. I don't want to use delete. Delete is what's called ripple delete. If you've ever used any other video software or Premiere Pro or anything like that, you might be familiar with the term. Ripple delete doesn't just delete that. What it does is it deletes everything kind of in that vertical vicinity and then snaps everything ahead of it or after it back over to it. So for example, if I move this clip up right here, I click on the clip and push delete. What that did is that shortened the clip underneath it, you can see that, and it snapped it together to the next clip. That can really mess you up, and so to keep things simple, we're not going to try to learn to use ripple delete effectively, because there just isn't, for our intents and purposes, it's not practical and it's not worth the risk of accidentally messing up your project, especially where video editing is so video audio dependent, right? Your visuals need to match your audio so acutely. So we're not going to do that. So what we're actually going to do is, oh, and by the way, to undo or to go backwards in action is Control Z. That's pretty common keystroke in most software. So in Control Z is undo, and you have almost unlimited undo. So if I sit here and push Control Z, you can see that it's undoing everything that I did. And then I can redo what I've undone with Control Shift Z and bring it back to the point that I was at. But we're gonna get it to right there. So what I'm gonna teach you how to do is I'm going to teach you how to just delete the negative space. And backspace is the more traditional, what we're familiar with delete. Backspace will only delete what you're selecting. And I'm sure you could go into hotkeys and you could switch that around, but by default, this is how it is, so I'm gonna teach it this way. I'm gonna select that negative space, I'm gonna hit backspace. And you can see that two things happened. It deleted the negative space, but as a result of deleting that negative space, it needed to move the clips forward. So if I select a clip and delete the clip, it's not going to do that because deleting negative space moves clips ahead of them or after them. But deleting a clip with backspace does not. See that? So it's important to know that distinction. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and, just for the sake of ease of editing, I have a bunch of clips on my timeline, but they're not snapped together. And instead of selecting the clips, moving them, selecting them, moving them, selecting them, moving them to snap them all together, I'm going to undo all of that. I'm going to select the negative space, delete it, select it, delete it, select it, and delete it. And so it makes it just a little bit easier. But let's go ahead and go back for just a second. If you remember when I was talking about frame rates earlier, the reason why higher frame rates can be useful or important is because high frame rates can be translated into slow motion. The way I have the clips on the timeline now, they're playing back at real life speed. Meaning if I push play, so if I bring my playhead to the beginning here and I push play, it's going to play through the clips in real time, or the way that they were recorded, right? And I'm actually going to bring this clip into it as well. It's going to bring it into the clip it's going to play it back on the timeline in real time, or in other words, the frame rate of our project settings. And by the way, at any time, you can go down to this lower corner, click on the little cogwheel, and see your project settings. 1900 by 1080, HD, resolution. It's square, pixels. You don't have to worry about that. And this is our editing. These are our editing settings. Most of these you don't need to worry about. They're definitely more complicated type things. And so at any time we can make sure. So whenever I play anything back, it's displaying it to me at 1900 by 1080 resolution at 24 frames per second, right? The playback frame rate is 24 frames per second. So let's say some of these clips are at a higher frame rate and I want to slow them down. DaVinci Resolve's retime functions, which are useful to a lot of people, or if you have a DSLR that's recording at a high frame rate, but the playback of it's not automatically slowing down the footage for you, it's just recording the footage at that frame rate, but then it's being played back to you in real time still, it's not in slow motion. That's how these clips are. So if I go to this one, which is C0013, I'm going to find that in my media pool, and you can see here, if I click on that little button in the corner, so this button right here is the audio. This button here is the what's called the metadata, or in other words, the data that's embedded into the video that tells you about the video. It's basically just a Word document explaining what the video, like the frame rate and the different things are. So it tells me it's at 1900 by 1080, but the frame rate is 59.940, or in other words, 60. It's the same thing. It's basically 60 FPS. We're gonna, for the sake of conversation, it's 60 FPS. That's what we're gonna call it. So that means that to get it down to 24 frames per second, I can slow it down up to about 40%. Or I can slow, not up to, excuse me. I can slow it down to 40% its original speed. DaVinci Resolve is really good at that. And this is kind of a math lesson, but to get high frame rate footage to play back in real time 24 frames per second in slow motion, you are looking at reducing. You're basically just saying, okay, what percentage of the playback speed does it need to be at for it to play back at 24 frames per second? For example, more or less 60 frames per second at 40% speed is 24 frames per second. 120 frames per second at 24 frames per second is about 20% speed. So I'm going to click on this clip. The hotkey is Control R, and that's for retime functions. So it changed the clip. And you can see here that I can do a couple of things. I can select this down arrow here, and I have a lot of options, but all we're going to worry about right now is we're just going to worry about change speed. And it has some default ones here. So 100, then it has 110 to 800, and then 10% to 75%. But I mentioned that this is 60 frames per second. To get this to play back at normal speed in slow motion, we need it at 40%, not 50 and not 25. So how do you do a custom value? The easiest way for me is to hover your mouse over to the corner until you see this icon where it is a line with two arrows on each side. Okay? And you click and drag once you see the icon, and look what's happening. I'm extending the clip, but this is extending the clip without adding any frames. So it's the same in and out points that I made at the beginning when I put it on the timeline. Now I'm just choosing at what playback speed is the timeline choosing to play it back at. And as a result, it needs to extend the length of the clip to compensate. So I put it at 40%. 40% speed. Now look. Now it's much slower. You can see that it's much slower, more cinematic. So if I undo that, it goes by much faster. If I redo that, Control Shift Z and Control Z to undo. So Control Z undo, Control Shift Z to redo as a reminder, and hit spacebar. By the way, spacebar is also play and pause on the timeline. You could come over here and press play and pause, but that's too much work. I'm lazy, so I like hotkeys. So I push spacebar. Now it's way more cinematic and nice and slow. It's that nice, slow establishing shot. And so that's what we want to begin with, right? We're going to establish this beautiful area. So that's great. So now let's take a look at some other clips. So this clip here. Now, this one, let's look at, I wonder if this has metadata on it. Oh, would you look at that? So you can actually look at the metadata within your timeline instead of getting the metadata from here, which can be useful as well. However, if I click on this and I have my metadata right here, or my inspector, which will go over all of these, but we're going to go over metadata. Now I can see that this clip is also 60 frames per second. Okay, and it tells me a lot. Actually, it tells me where it is. It tells me a whole bunch about it. And so this is 60 frames per second as well. Well, let's say I don't want to go all the way. You know, that might be too long. And so, or let's say I want it to be at full speed, but I want it to slow down once it comes into focus. So I'm going to cut this clip. So let's say I want this to play back at normal speed. I want to whoosh around that gate. But then when it comes into focus, I want it to slow down. So I'm going to hit B, which is for the blade tool, which you use to cut. And you can see once I hit B, my mouse icon changes when I move over a clip. And I'm also getting a preview of where I'm about to cut within the clip. So I want to do it right about here where my playhead is, and it will kind of snap to the playhead. It'll snap. And you can turn snapping off with this little magnet. Basically, that just enables you to, well, let me just show you actually. So I'm going to hit A to switch back to my regular selection tool. With snapping on, this clip will snap to either that clip or the Playhead, right? Or if I'm using the blade tool, my blade tool will snap to the Playhead, and so on and so forth. Snapping, just kind of think of them like close. The reason why it's a magnet icon is because snapping basically works like magnets. Everything in your timeline is magnetic, so to speak. And if they get close enough together, sometimes they'll kind of snap together. And that is nice to have, because then it doesn't leave you with any unwanted negative space or unwanted trimming. If I turn off snapping and hit A to switch back to my selection tool, because I don't want to trim it right now. If I turn off snapping and move it over, look what happens. It's not snapping it, it's overlaying it. And we don't want that, right? We want it to snap, because we want to just play right after that clip. We don't want it to potentially have a space with some black frames in there. See, if I just moved it to where I thought it was close enough, there's a little black frame right in there. Or if I move it too close, it might get rid of some of the frames from the previous clip that I want. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to turn snapping back on and snap it to that clip. And by the way, if you don't want your clips to look like that after you've changed their speed, and you can change the speed down more than your frame rate allows, it's just it'll hit each frame longer and it'll look kind of jumpy. And so, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just it might not benefit what you're trying to do. So if you ever want to hide the speed controls, just hit Control R again. So it just toggles those speed controls. Okay, so we want it to slow down right about here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the blade tool and I'm going to cut it. So what I did there with my blade tool is I cut it. Now it's two separate clips. Even though originally it was the same clip and they're both from the same clip that I got from my in and out points, I have now separated them into two clips and I can manipulate them individually. So if I hit A again to switch back to my normal tool, now I can just select this clip. And that enables me to hit Control R and extend it out to 40%. Or slower if I wanted to, but let's just do 40% for now. Now look what happens. If I play back, that's normal speed, but then it slows down right when it comes into focus. Okay, so our timeline is already looking pretty good. We have a nice slow cinematic there. We have this where we come around that fence and then it slows down right there. That looks nice. So now we have this clip here. I'm going to drag it over and have it snap to there. Or I could delete the negative space if I wanted to do it that way. And again, deleting negative space does have a slight ripple effect, but it's not quite as much of a ripple effect as using the delete key, just as a reminder. So this clip here, if I click on it and I have my metadata tab opened on this side of the screen, you can see that this clip is also 60 frames per second. So to give it more of a cinematic feel, I'm going to hit Control R while I have it selected and stretch it out to 40%. Then hit Control R again. And that gives it that slower cinematic feel. But now it feels a little too long. So these clips, they look pretty nice. And this clip is longer, but it goes slow motion halfway in the middle, so entertainment value isn't lost. But this clip, I think it lasts just a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim it. But instead of, there's a couple ways I can do it. I can select my blade tool or hit B on my keyboard, B as in boy, and I can, let's say I want to trim it right there. Okay, so I trimmed it right there. I didn't trim it, I sliced it right there. Now I can select that and hit backspace to delete that portion of the clip. That works. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way, but that was a few steps. So to eliminate those steps, I can move my playhead to the part where I want it to end, and then I can hover my icon over the end of the clip. And if you look, there are actually a few different icons that come up. So if I'm hovering over it slightly to the left of this edge right here, then it gives me this video clip with a trimmer icon on the right side. If I click and hold, that gives me the ability to either extend it or shorten it. And in this case, we want to shorten it, right? But it's dynamically extending and shortening the clip. Now, the really interesting thing about this is you'll notice that when I click and select that, you see that white outline that appears? It's showing me how big that clip would be if I extended it all the way out to the end of the original clip. So you remember how we created in and out points and put it on the timeline? Well, this is my in and out points, but if I click here, it shows me the length from start to finish of the original clip, and that can be useful to know. So for our intents and purposes, we're going to click and drag and snap it to the playhead, because that's about how long we want it to clip. Drag the playback head back a little bit and play it back using spacebar, and it looks pretty good. There, that's slow, and then it switches to that. Not too bad. Okay, so, and by the way, you just press spacebar again just to stop it from playing back if you're done watching that small portion. Because that's how I like to work. I like to set the playhead where I want it, and then hit spacebar to play back and kind of watch what I have. And if I'm pleased with it, I just hit pause and then continue working. I don't have to watch through the whole thing every time. And I wouldn't recommend it because it's kind of a waste of time. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly cut this together a little bit farther. So I'm actually going to trim this a little more. It was still a little too long. Then there's this clip, so I'm going to do that, move it over. And this clip, if I look at the inspector, or not the inspector, excuse me, the metadata of the clip I have selected, and I can just toggle that if I need to. Oh, and by the way, for now I'm done with my media pool, so I can actually click on the media pool to minimize it. So I have my metadata here, and this one is also 60 frames per second. So Control R, retime it. Control R. I'm going to dynamically trim it back to right there. Okay. This clip is actually a higher frame rate. So it's 119.88, which is effectively 120. Like, who are we kidding? So I'm going to retime this one down to 20%. And you can see even playing it back at 20%, it's still nice and silky smooth because it's that cinematic slow motion. So, okay, that looks nice. I'm going to trim it and snap it and save my project. So you can already see how quickly you can work in DaVinci Resolve. You can do a lot in DaVinci Resolve, but you can work very quickly. It's very fast editing software. And once you learn all the hotkeys, it goes even faster. So now, let's say that this clip was too short and this clip was too long. Okay. Now, there's a couple ways I can go about this. Number one, I can move my playhead to the point where I want this clip to extend to. Then I can click and drag the clip after it over, and then I can extend that one out. And then it would play back as follows. But there's a faster way to do that. So I just did Control Z to undo those. There's a faster way. If you'll notice, check this out. If I move my mouse in between those clips, so you can see the different icons that are appearing. If I move it in between, there's one where it shows the edges of both videos. If I click and drag, it's going to dynamically clip and trim, or extend and trim, extend and trim the clips between each other while keeping them connected. So I move it to the right, it's extending the clip before it and trimming the clip after, and vice versa if I move it left. Can you see that? And my preview window is showing me the end frame of the first clip and the beginning frame of the second clip. Really, really handy and really nice to have when you're editing, so you can get it, get your videos picture perfect, so to speak. So I'm going to trim it to about there, because you'll notice I'm actually, if you haven't noticed a trend, I'm trying to semi-match the length of the clips here. And then this clip might be just a little too long, so I'll trim it back a little bit, just like that. Now, and by the way, this right here, up here, is just your in and out on your timeline. So you know how your clips have in and out? Your timeline does too, but I'm not as worried about that. I usually just kind of extend that out as far as I need it and not really worry about it. And then if you go past it, you can just keep extending and extending, and you know, it's not a big deal. So, okay, so now we can go back to the beginning, and we can actually hit Control F for full screen, and that brings us to full screen for the timeline preview, so you can get a better idea of what it looks like, and hit play. Now you can see it's playing back in real time. Got that nice slow motion there. I've got that slow motion there, and then right there, and then it's done. So I'll hit Control F to turn full screen back off to return to my editor. Okay, so it's looking pretty good, and you know, we've actually accomplished quite a bit with some really basic hotkeys and some basic editing techniques. It's not complicated. DaVinci Resolve looks a whole lot scarier than it actually is. And once you learn how timelines work and the way that it is, it becomes a lot simpler. So let's actually make a few more adjustments while we're here, just so I can, you know, some housekeeping items, some effects, and, you know, adding some music. And we'll get into cutting the music later, but that's not as important. So let's say I didn't want to cut between the clips. Let's say I wanted to either fade between the clips, either fade to black or something, or let's say I want to crossfade, meaning the previous clip starts to dissolve while the clip after it starts to come in at the same time. So I'm going to open my effects library, and I'm actually going to extend this one down because there's a lot in here. So I'm going to click this little arrow to extend it down, and I can resize this if I want, or this portion here, and you can resize it pretty extensively. And I'm going to go to video transitions, and there are a lot of transitions here. So the one we're going to actually do is just cross dissolve. You can actually do dip to color, or there's a bunch of other ones, or a smooth cut. There's all sorts of them, okay? Or motion, you can have it push the clip aside, you know, do different shapes, wipe if you want it to look like a Star Wars film. There's a lot you can do. So cross dissolve, I'm going to click and drag this, and you can see that I have a few options. Since it's a transition, we want to put it in between two clips. It has to be in between two clips. That's how transitions typically work. DaVinci Resolve is very forgiving, and it lets you put it at the beginning of a clip even though there's nothing before it, but it'll just treat the clip before it as black, so it'll fade in. But we're not going to do it that way because I'll show you a different way that's better. For a transition, however, I want to cross dissolve that clip there. Okay? So now, check this out. Now they cross dissolve between each other, right? If you want kind of a dreamy look or something like that, you can cross dissolve. It's up to you whether you think they look nice or not. I personally don't use these transitions often. I like to just hard cut. That's what's most important. But you need to know that they're there, because there might be a scenario where you will need it. So we're going to leave it in for the sake of today for education. Now, what we're going to do is this clip, we're not going to do a transition in between those because we don't need one. We just want that to go slow motion. If we did a transition, it might look kind of funny. Well, let's see what it does actually. It doesn't hurt. So you can see that gives it kind of that headache kind of, you know, in movies when people are buzzed or they're drunk or they have like a headache, or I don't know if it's a military, they got flashbanged or whatever. It kind of has that double effect on it. And so you can create some really cool effects by doing it, but for our intents and purposes, probably don't need it. So I'll go ahead and hit undo on that. But for this one, let's say we want to fade to white. So you have where did I just see that? Dip to color. Right there. And it's automatically set to dip to white. So it dips to white just like that. Okay. It doesn't look the best, but again, I'm just illustrating a point. Okay. And then let's just I don't know. Let's push this one. So this one will push the clip out to make room for the next one. Like I said, they don't always look super professional. Like, I don't recommend using these often. And you can do some modifications to it like this to make it look a little nicer. See how it kind of has that kind of curve to it now? You can see ease in and out, that transition curve there. So I mean, you know, it is what it is, but I'm just showing you transitions. Okay, and then I'm just gonna do a heart for the last one. It's super cheesy, but I'm gonna do it. Okay, cool. Okay, so again, that's just to illustrate a point, but that's what we're doing today. So now if I go back, I have some transitions in between my videos. So that one kind of blurs between the two, or fades between the two. That fades to white. That one kind of moves it to the side, and then this one kind of opens up with a heart. Again, quite cheesy, but you know, you get the point. Okay, so I'm going to close my effects library for now, because that's, well, no, actually, before I leave, I'm going to show you some titles. If I click on titles, we have some text options, and usually you'll just use either a lower third or a regular text. So I'm going to click and drag and move this on here. And I'm going to title this, oh my goodness, I have caps lock on, DaVinci Resolve Rocks. Okay, so, and then we once I have that text in there, I just click and drag just like I did for any other clip, and I click and drag over the top, not replacing, but on a different layer in my timeline. Timelines work in layers, as you can see here, and you can have layers up into infinity. I usually only keep 3 or 4 though. Okay, now I have some text options, of course, so I can come over here. Now, anything you have selected, you have metadata and you have inspector. The inspector is kind of like the clip properties. So in this case, since it's a text clip that I've dragged onto my timeline, it's showing me the text that's in here, the font, so I can change the font. I'd probably keep that. We can make it bold if we want, or we can make it italic. We can change the size. We can change the spacing. We can change the line spacing, and then we can make it crossed out. We can do all sorts of fun stuff to it, okay? And we can change the alignment, which is what I was looking for, okay? Perfect. Now, that I have that, I'm going to switch over to my video tab within the inspector. Again, this is just the properties of the text, or the video clip that I have selected. Within this, I can choose the X and Y scale. I can choose the X and Y position. I can choose the rotation. I can choose the anchor point, which we're not too worried about it. I can choose the pitch, which is, you know, if I wanted to do like Star Wars text or something. I can choose the yaw, which gives it that kind of 3D effect, right? I can flip it, so I can, you know, if you want to make a reflection or something, you can do that. And then I can crop it. So let's say I wanted to like crop it so it only showed half of the text. I don't know why I'd want to do that for now. There are other reasons, but we won't really get into that. Not quite as important. Okay. Awesome. So I have my text, and my text is over my footage. Just like that. Now, it looks a little bit cheesy, but it's okay. Within the text editor, or not within the text editor, excuse me, with the text clip, you can, I'm going to show you how to just fade it in and out very quickly. And this applies to almost all video clips that I can think of. Okay. So I'm going to trim the clip so that it stops at the end of that clip there. And if I hover over to the corner, and by the way, you need to have your video height high enough so that these things appear for you. If your video height isn't tall enough, it won't appear. So that's why this was important that I had the video height as high as it was. See how when I raise it up enough, there's a little line that appears? You need that line to appear to be able to have these controls. This is why DaVinci Resolve is just so fast and so good for just casual editors. It's great for experienced editors as well, but casual editors it's really good for too. These little icons in the corners of these videos, if I click and drag on them, it does like a chamfer graphic there, where it chamfers the edge. That's fading it. So if I fade it like that, it's going to fade in, and then at the end, it's going to fade out. Okay. You can do that for your video clips as well. So let's say this one, I just want to extend it and fade it out slowly. So now you can see it fades out slowly, just like that. Okay. All right. Close our effects library. We're done for now. So let's talk a little bit about audio. Audio is very important. The audio, of course, complements your video. In fact, it's very, very important. This is a basic course. I'm just going to teach you how to work with a, like voice, or to work with, let's say, music that you put over it. So what I'm actually going to do is, just while I'm teaching you this, I'm actually going to, I just have a little portable voice recorder, and I'm going to record my own voice. Okay. Push record on there. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is a course on how to use DaVinci Resolve, and it's awesome. Okay. I'm going to stop that. Get it loaded in to our project here. Plug it into my computer. By the way, I'm going to hit Control S to save. Excuse me. Okay. And I'm just going to import it. I'm just going to put it into my videos folder. Put it into my project here. Okay, so now I have some voiceover to work with. So I can go back to the tab. I'm going to click on videos. And I'm going to go to where I put it. So right here, this WAV file. Drag it in. Now you can see. Push record on there. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is a course on how to use DaVinci Resolve, and it's awesome. Cool. Easy enough. So now, come back into my Edit tab. I'm going to click on Media Pool, and I'm going to click on the WAV file here. And just like a video, I'm going to create in and out points. So right here is an in, and right here is an out. I'm just going to click and drag it onto my timeline. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is a course on how to use DaVinci Resolve, and it's awesome. Okay, pretty straightforward. Some audio processing you can do is if I go to my effects library, get rid of my media pool there, go to audio effects, and usually I just want to click and drag the dialogue processor on there. And that'll apply some basic audio effects to the clip. So like a compressor, which makes things that are quiet louder and things that are loud a little quieter. It just kind of compresses the waveform a little bit. Okay, and I can just hit the little X up here to close that window, and it'll apply that effect. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is a course on how to use DaVinci Resolve. Okay, I can click on that, and I can right click on it, excuse me. By the way, any clip in your timeline, you can right click it and it gives you more options. And you can play around with these and do different things with those options. But if I right click on my audio, I can do normalize audio levels. And this will just show me, it has a few different ways I can do it. I can just make it so that the highest point in the audio never gets to above -4 decibels. By the way, you never want to go, almost never want to go above 0 decibels. In fact, most audio processing, you want to keep it below, in between the -6 and -3 range, or else it'll overload and distort the audio. I'm no audio technician, and this course is focusing more so on how to use DaVinci Resolve, but the TLDR is that you don't want to record too quiet because then you'll get a lot of background noise, but you won't want to record too loud because then it'll clip. And when the audio peaks and gets loud, if I go really loud for a second, it'll actually hit a wall and it can't record any louder. So let's normalize that to -3 or 4 decibels, which was already pretty close. Testing to that. 1, 2, 3. This is a course on how to use DaVinci Resolve. And that looks pretty good. Looks and sounds pretty good. So now we're actually going to get rid of our effects library here and go back to our media pool. And I'm going to bring in music. Now this music is from bensound.com. I'm going to give him a shout out because he makes royalty-free music as long as you give him credit. Now what's going to happen is my music is going to overpower my voice. Listen. Testing 1, 2, 3. So you can tell this is a course too loud, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lower it, and you can just click and drag this little line that's on the audio, and that will actually raise and lower the volume of the clips. So I'm going to lower it to maybe like -5 or so. And if you want to get more fine-tuned with it, you can actually select the clip, come up to your inspector, and you can adjust the volume using this little adjuster here, and it will help you kind of fine-tune it just a little bit better. So anyway, I'm going to do it to about probably 12 decibels is a good spot. Now, just some testing. Nice background music. 1, 2, 3. This is a course on how to use DaVinci Resolve. And it's going through pretty nicely, and my voice is cutting through the music because my voice is, in the -3, 4 decibel range, and my music never gets above -12. So that's really important. Some music might be higher, a little more busier, and so you might need to have a lower volume there, but for our intents and purposes, this works just fine. And so as you can see, we're already getting pretty close to being done. We have a title, we have some video, we have transitions, we have a voice track, and we have a music track. Just like this. Testing 1. You can already probably see the potential applications for this. To make a simple ad on Facebook, you can take some pictures or video with your phone, and you can show off a product or a service. You can create a voiceover that says, 10% off this weekend or something like that. And you can create some text that says, here's our address or our phone number or whatever. And really basic ad creation. And this is what I mean when I say that it's a great way to save money, instead of paying hundreds or thousands of dollars for media companies to create ads for you. This is a great way to just have a presence online, have them be nice looking videos. I'm not going to get into the cinematography. Maybe if if I decide to make a cinematography course to help, with the behind the scenes creating footage for yourself and for your ads or whatever, maybe I'll do that. But for now, we're sticking with this. But we're not quite done yet. In fact, we haven't quite gotten to one of my favorite parts of video editing, and that's the color tab within DaVinci Resolve.